Congratulations once again on winning the 15th Global Architecture and Design Awards, William, for the
Thank you.
Incheon project. So, William, I'd like to get your idea of, the initial brief of the project and the concept about the project. So, what was it like?
Yeah, so the initial brief, the project involved basically the creation of a public library and museum combined for the city of Incheon in South Korea. And the complexity was that it had to balance both the current culture of the community, the history that is very extensive in that region of the world, and also the future in which it will be providing the context for how that community moves forward into the future. And it was something that talked not only about the history of the people themselves, but also how you build something about the past for the future community, because it was a brand new development for the community. And so it was very much also a conversation about architecture and design and infrastructure and how that should be thought of, or how thoughtful someone should be about that when they're starting to create a place that brings together both history and future together.
Exactly. I mean, it does have a moving motion behind that, right? So, what was the design of the project like? I mean, how did it look?
Yeah, so the design of the project, it was a complex design, but the idea stemmed from one big picture idea, which was basically the roof of this project. So the project itself was 20 square meters, so it was a huge footprint for a building. And if it's not designed properly, it would look more like a warehouse than an actual building. So the complexities we're basically trying to break down the scale of this project so that it could fit nicely as it's adjacent to a residential neighborhood, but also in a way that it could benefit the building and also create harmony with some of the local characteristics of the site itself. So there are two main elements in the area that the design had to be acknowledged in the way it was formed, which was, one is the community itself in the city and how it connects across the site and how it connects the people and how people start to walk around and how they actually integrate with the site and want to move through it and around it. And the other one is there's what I would call a green belt, or like a landscaped, or a portion of the landscape that continues around the city and through the city, and it's more of a natural landscape that is preserved, and the city is built in different parts, but there's always this kind of natural element, kind of like a pearl necklace that the people can go to have some natural relief from the urban context. And both of those things kind of merge at this one point where the site is located. And so the design had to embrace both of them at the same time. How do you make a place for people but connect a landscape across it? And that was
Exactly. And also, William, when you do a project of such breadth, right? What is the development strategy of the project like? And, what are the phases that are involved in development of this project?
Yeah. So for this project, it was a competition, which is very different from many other projects, which are more standard. This being a competition, we had a very limited amount of time, and again, it was such a big program, so we worked probably half the time was focused on just the design. And so we really wanted to make a design that spoke well to the community, that was something so local in nature, and that resolved these kind of really hard, complicated issues that we were presented with. And so that forced us to kind of focus at least 50% of our time on the actual form and design of the form itself, which typically you wouldn't find in a project. That's way too much time to spend on design, but this, because it's a competition and because of the nature of the project, it required that. And so that's something that we've spent a lot of time looking at. And then the other half of the time we spent creating all the images and plans and sections and technical drawings for the presentation boards and laying out the boards. And so again, it was some focus on the documentation that you may see in a typical project, but again, because it's a competition, there was also much more focus on the actual presentation of the information itself, which is very important in a competition.
All right. So, were there also any kind of specific tools or, the pieces of research that the team used in this project?
Yeah, so actually, I think something I'd like to point out is the tools. The tools are actually part of the team itself. We gathered a group of team members that were well versed in programs that we needed, such as Rhino and Revit, and I think Blender as well, but also people that were from the place itself. So we brought in some team members that were from South Korea that had lived in an area nearby of this new neighborhood. And so they could help also advise us on how does a Korean city usually lay out their parking spaces? What kind of codes do they look for? What types of egress do they need? There's a lot of questions that, especially in a competition where you're designing for a specific place that's in a different part of the world than where you are, it's very important that you actually show them that you understand the codes and the local requirements that they have. If you don't, it'd be an obvious issue with any competition entry if you didn't actually understand the basic needs of the local municipality. And so we brought in team members that could help us with that as well. And I would consider them wonderful tools that really helped us refine the project and make it a lot better and make it much more obvious that it was one designed for the local community and not just from some international team.
Exactly. And you lay an emphasis on the local community, like this project in itself does that. So what was the material palette like? I mean, was there a conscious effort to also use vernacular material? I mean, integrate the vernacular materiality in it, or the sourcing the material from the local dealers? And
yeah, so I would say the local material, I think, was more inspired. So the material of the building was more inspired by the urban and the landscape kind of, again, colliding or being combined at this one specific point. This kind of merge of the two. So we used concrete for the structure, and we used a green roof, which included large plantings and trees of different sizes across the top of the building. If you were to look at our design, you would see that there's the building is basically a series of steps, and the steps are green platforms that make their way up the building and back down the other side, and it serves as a centerpiece and as a connection for both the community to enter underneath and for the landscape to bridge across. And the material of the region, I think, is best reflected in that nature.
yeah, exactly, William. But we've touched upon the materiality. I'd also like to gather an idea of yours about off-site and on-site manufacturing. What do you personally prefer, and what is the way ahead for us?
So on-site versus off-site manufacturing is complicated. I think a lot, it depends on the project. Obviously, I think on-site manufacturing and local skills and making sure things are done locally and by the people that will be using the facility as much as possible is critical. At the same time, when there are complexities that require things to be done off-site and then brought to the site later, I think sometimes that's also necessary, just so that, for instance, if there's a very complex formwork that needs to be precast rather than cast in place, that's something that definitely should be done off-site and brought in. However, there is always when things are done on-site, there's always a level of I don't know, personal touch, I guess. Yeah, it's something you can't find by machine or by something that's done too perfect. And I think there's something about being able to understand that something was created by a hand, much like your own, allows it to be much more personable and understood, which I think is a great quality.
Yeah. Okay. So also, William, we've spoken how project had its sight on sustainability as well, right? So I'd like to know, how does this project not only meet these strict environmental standards, but also takes it like notches higher?
So there's idea about sustainability is, I think, a complex one for our team. One is you can always meet the requirements on a piece of paper, I think. If,
Yeah.
for instance, in the United States, there's LEED accreditation, which is just a checklist of different items you need to have in your building or around your building to become LEED Platinum or LEED Gold.
The result is greenwashing.
There's another way to express the idea of sustainability and designing for the environment, which is to lead lead the design in a way that speaks about it to the people that see it every day. So it's not that it was that used a certain aggregate in the concrete and it's some detail in the specifications of the project that no one will ever see once the project's complete. It should be something that is obvious and that is a hallmark of the project that stands out and that people can look at and recognize and say that is an aspect of the design that was done because it's conscious of the environment and it wants to improve our future on this earth and improve the climate. You know, wants to try to reverse some of the carbon emissions. How do you express that in the design of a building? I think it's a really important question, and one that we did try to capture. Again, with the green roof in itself provides a multitude of opportunities to enhance the design from a sustainable point of view. One is it's a green roof which naturally connects the landscape on both sides, like I had mentioned, but also it completely reduces the idea of any type of water runoff, which is a huge issue in terms of where water goes from a building when there's a rain event, a storm, and where does that water get captured, and the complexities of the plumbing needed, and also the load on the infrastructure of the city that has to accommodate it. So for this building with a green roof, that watershed is eliminated. It's all kind of kept on site on the roof and for the plant life that's on the building. In the summer, the plants help protect the building from excessive heat, which reduces the cooling load needed for the building. In the winter, it creates a layer of insulation so we don't have to heat the building as much. It maintains the heat within the building at a better capacity. And then the way we took the building and kind of broke it down into what I would call cubes and how they kind of stepped up and down across the building and the roof. It provided opportunities to have what I would call clear stories, which are small windows along those edges that allowed natural light to come into the spaces below and illuminate those spaces naturally rather than having artificial light do that, which again reduces the need for electrical costs and carbon emissions and pollution.
All right, William. So, we've talked about sustainability and meeting the environmental standards in our project. So, along the similar lines, I'd like to know what is your idea of rethinking the future in the realm of architecture and design?
Yeah, so my idea of rethinking the future, it's a tough question. I think what it really comes down to is I think it's understanding that each of us have the ability to not only rethink the future, but to remake the future. The future, just the way it's described, it sounds like it's something that's not tangible. It's not something you and I can touch today, that it is to come and we are not part of that. Where I think in reality, you and I and everyone else are kind of building the future as we whatever, depending on whatever we do every day. If you and I do nothing every day, then the world's going to continue to move in the direction it's going. And some people think that's not a great direction, and that we'll have global warming, and that this will all keep getting worse. And that's something you and I can change, and everybody else. There's nobody we're waiting for to do it for us. It's either us or it's nobody. And so we basically have to make that decision and do that ourselves. And we have to understand that it's on us to make those changes. It's never fun to do the hard things.
Right.
But that's something we have to.
All right. I appreciate such an insightful response to this question and great response, honestly. So that was all from our end, William. I'd like to thank you, extend a thanks from our RTF family to you. And we look forward to having you again in the near future with same brilliant projects.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate the interview, and it was a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Have a good one.
Yeah.